July 11th, 1943, near Gela, Sicily. The morning heat shimmered off dusty roads as Tiger tanks of Schwere Panzer Abteilung 504 advanced toward American positions. Inside these 60-ton steel fortresses, German crews maintained absolute confidence. Their 100mm frontal armor had proven impervious to Allied weapons in Tunisia and across the steppes of Russia. The Americans ahead possessed nothing that could threaten them. Then movement caught a commander's eye through his periscope. An American soldier, emerging from rubble 200 meters distant, shouldering what appeared to be a metal tube. The weapon looked almost crude, like plumbing equipment hastily assembled. Some Tiger crews had seen similar devices before, captured specimens examined briefly in Tunisia and dismissed as ineffective American improvisation. Within minutes, that dismissal would prove catastrophically premature. The first rocket struck a Tiger's track assembly with a sharp crack, followed by an explosion that sent fragments of steel spinning across the road. The massive tank lurched to a halt, 60 tons of German engineering rendered immobile by a weapon that weighed 13 pounds. More American soldiers appeared from windows and doorways, each carrying the same tubular weapon. Rockets began streaking toward the Tigers from multiple directions, some deflecting harmlessly off frontal armor, others finding weak points at turret rings and engine compartments. The shaped charges burned through steel that moments before had seemed invulnerable. This moment near Gela marked something unprecedented in armoured warfare. German tank crews, who had terrorised Poland and France with lightning advances, who had driven deep into Soviet territory with seeming invincibility, now faced infantry armed with weapons that transformed the fundamental equation of combat. What began as confident advance became cautious retreat. The Tigers that survived withdrew from Gela's narrow streets, leaving behind burning hulks and shaken crews who understood they had just witnessed the end of an era. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The mathematics were elegantly devastating and would haunt German tank commanders for the remainder of the war. The Bazooka weighed 13 pounds. A Tiger tank weighed 120,000 pounds. The cost ratio proved even more staggering. One Bazooka cost the United States Army $18 to manufacture. One Tiger tank cost the Reich 250,000 Reichsmarks, equivalent to approximately $100,000. Yet that $18 tube could transform 250,000 Reichsmarks of precision engineering into burning wreckage within seconds. The weapon's origins traced to improvisation, born of desperate necessity. In early 1942, the United States Army faced a critical vulnerability. German tanks had proven superior to most Allied armor in North Africa. American infantry possessed no effective man-portable anti-tank weapon. Standard anti-tank rifles proved inadequate against modern armor. Towed anti-tank guns required trucks to move them and crews to operate them, making them vulnerable to German combined arms tactics. American soldiers needed something that could be carried by individual infantrymen, operated quickly, and destroy enemy tanks. At Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, Captain Leslie Skinner and Lieutenant Edward Ewell worked on solving this seemingly impossible problem. The Army had developed the M10-shaped charge grenade, which used the Monroe effect to focus explosive energy into a superheated jet capable of penetrating armor. The challenge was delivery. Throwing the grenade was impractical. It was too heavy and required dangerous proximity to enemy tanks. Various spigot mortar designs had been tested, but none proved reliable or accurate enough for combat. According to Ewell's own account, the solution came from accident and observation. Walking past a scrap pile at Aberdeen, he spotted a metal tube approximately 60 millimeters in diameter, matching the size of the M10 grenade they had been converting into a rocket. The realization struck immediately. Put the tube on a soldier's shoulder with the rocket inside, and the exhaust would vent harmlessly behind the operator while the rocket accelerated forward toward the target. Within hours, Ewell had fashioned a crude launcher with a shoulder rest and basic trigger mechanism. For sights, he bent a wire coat hanger into a crude aiming device. This improvised weapon faced skepticism when demonstrated at Aberdeen in May 1942. 5 different spigot mortars, all considered more promising by Army ordnance experts, participated in the competitive trial. The test involved engaging a moving tank target at 200 yards. The spigot mortars fired repeatedly. None hit the target. Then Uhl shouldered his tube launcher with its coat hanger sights. The first rocket struck the moving tank directly. He loaded another rocket and fired again. Another direct hit. Major General Gladion Marcus Barnes, Chief of Research and Engineering, watched the demonstration with growing excitement. He immediately ordered 5,000 units and, noting the weapon's resemblance to a musical instrument played by comedian Bob Burns, christened it the Bazooka. The name stuck, though nothing would prove amusing about what it represented for German tank crews. For the first time in modern warfare, a single infantryman could destroy a tank. The technological principle behind this capability was elegant. The shaped charge used the Monroe effect, discovered in 1888 by American scientist Charles Monroe. When a hollow cavity lined with metal faces toward a target, the explosive detonation collapses the liner inward, creating a jet of superheated metal traveling at velocities exceeding 25,000 feet per second. This jet, concentrated to a point smaller than a pencil tip, burns through armor like a cutting torch through paper. 8 ounces of pentelete explosive in the bazooka warhead could penetrate up to 4 inches of hardened steel. General Electric received the first production contract, working frantically to deliver 5,000 weapons for Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa in November 1942. But Operation Torch revealed significant problems. General Dwight Eisenhower discovered on invasion eve that troops lacked training. Many soldiers had never even seen a bazooka, let alone fired one. The M6 rockets proved notoriously unreliable in desert conditions. Many failed to detonate upon impact. Others stuck inside launch tubes and exploded, killing operators. These failures provided German intelligence with captured samples, but German analysis reached conclusions that would prove catastrophic. German engineers examined the bazookas captured in Tunisia during late 1942 and early 1943. Their assessment focused on technical specifications. The 60mm warhead appeared adequate for destroying light tanks, but insufficient against heavy German armor. The crude electrical firing system seemed prone to failure. The weapon's short effective range, approximately 100 to 150 meters, meant operators had to expose themselves dangerously close to enemy tanks. What German analysts failed to grasp was not the bazooka's technical limitations, but America's industrial capacity for rapid improvement and mass production. German military culture emphasized perfection in design before production. Weapons underwent extensive testing and refinement. Production runs remained limited until all problems were resolved. This approach created superior individual weapons but meant slow deployment. Limited quantities. American military-industrial culture operated differently. Deploy adequate weapons quickly, then improve them based on combat feedback, while expanding production continuously. By mid-1943, American engineers had addressed most reliability issues. The M1A1 variant featured improved electrical systems, better rockets designated M6, A1 that rarely misfired, and simplified mechanisms that reduced field failures. More significantly, production accelerated dramatically. What began as thousands of weapons in late 1942 became tens of thousands by mid-1943. German analysis of captured bazookas occurred in February 1943 at weapons testing facilities outside Berlin. Engineers immediately recognized both threat and opportunity. Within months, they developed the Panzerschreck, scaling the bazooka's 60mm warhead to 88mm for greater penetration. But this revealed the critical German weakness that would define the weapon's strategic impact. While German engineers could design a superior individual weapon, Germany lacked America's production capacity. The Reich would ultimately produce approximately 290,000 Panzerschrecks during the war's final 2 years, a respectable number reflecting dedicated manufacturing effort. but America would produce nearly 500,000 bazookas, along with over 15 million rockets. The quantitative gap meant American infantry could fire anti-tank rockets with abandon, while German Panzer Schreck teams had to carefully conserve ammunition. Sicily's invasion in July 1943 provided the bazooka's first major test against German heavy armor. The Hermann Göring Panzer Division and elements of Schwere Panzer Abteilung 504 deployed 17 Tigers total across the island. These massive tanks represented Germany's most advanced armoured fighting vehicles, with 100 mm frontal armour, 80 mm side armour, and the devastating 88 mm K-36 gun. Tigers had dominated every battlefield they entered since deployment in late 1942. German commanders planned to use Sicily's Tigers as counterattack reserves, smashing any American advance with overwhelming armoured power. On July 11th, Tigers advanced toward the American beachhead near Gela, supported by Italian armour and German infantry. The German plan assumed American infantry would break and run when confronted by Tigers, as so many Allied soldiers had done previously in North Africa and on the Eastern Front. What followed shocked German crews in ways that after-action reports struggled to articulate. German commanders later described how American infantry initially appeared to retreat, drawing Tigers into Gela's narrow streets where their mobility advantages evaporated. Then rockets began firing from windows, doorways, and rubble piles. They came from positions invisible until rockets were already in flight. The distinctive whoosh of bazooka launches became a sound German tank crews would learn to fear viscerally. Multiple Tigers took hits within the first minutes of entering the town. While bazookas frequently could not penetrate Tiger frontal armor at acute angles, they proved devastatingly effective against tracks, vision devices, turret rings, and engine compartments. Even non-penetrating hits had psychological effect. Tank crews could hear the explosion's sharp crack against their hull. They could feel the vibration through 60 tons of steel. They could smell burning metal and explosive residue. Each impact reminded them that the next rocket might find a vulnerability that would turn their armored fortress into a crematorium. American soldiers discovered through trial and error which tactics worked against Tigers. Targeting tracks for immobilization became standard practice. An immobilized Tiger became a fixed fortification rather than a mobile threat. Once stopped, American infantry could maneuver to flanks or rear where armor was thinner. Multiple bazooka teams working in coordination proved especially effective. One team would fire to suppress the tank crew and obscure their vision. Another team would flank to engage weak points. The weapon's true power lay not in individual lethality but in ubiquity. By summer 1943, American rifle companies carried multiple bazookas as standard equipment. Marine divisions received authorization for 172 bazookas each. Infantry divisions deployed similar numbers. This meant every German tank advance potentially faced dozens of bazooka teams distributed across the battlefield. Tank crews trained as apex predators suddenly became prey, constantly scanning for threats that could emerge from any building, hedgerow, or depression in the ground. The psychological impact manifested immediately and profoundly. German tanks that had charged aggressively across North African deserts now advanced cautiously through Sicilian villages, constantly scanning for infantry with rocket launchers. Urban combat, once merely dangerous, became borderline suicidal without massive infantry support to suppress bazooka teams. Night operations, previously a German tactical specialty that exploited superior training and equipment, became impossibly dangerous. Darkness that concealed German movement also concealed American infantry, armed with weapons that killed at close range. German tactical responses revealed the depth of transformation. Tank commanders began welding spare track links and sheet metal to their vehicles as improvised armor, designed to detonate shaped charges prematurely before they contacted main armor. These Schürzen, or skirts, sometimes proved effective but made tanks heavier, slower, and mechanically less reliable. The expedient solutions degraded performance, while only partially addressing vulnerability. More significantly, German armoured warfare doctrine fundamentally changed. The blitzkrieg concept of rapid mechanized advance, armored spearheads operating independently deep behind enemy lines, became impossible when infantry armed with rocket launchers infested every potential approach. German tanks now required constant infantry screens, reducing speed to walking pace. The essence of German mechanized warfare, speed combined with independent operation, was systematically negated by weapons that turned every American infantryman into a potential tank killer. Statistics revealed the transformation's scale. In France, during 1940, German panzer divisions achieved tank-to-tank kill ratios exceeding 10-1 against Allied armor. By late 1943 in Italy, German tanks facing bazooka-equipped American infantry approached 1-to-1 casualty ratios when losses from all causes were calculated. The Wehrmacht's primary advantage, armored superiority that had terrorized Europe, had largely evaporated against an enemy that armed common soldiers with tank-killing capability. The bazooka struck at Nazi ideology's core in ways that transcended mere military effectiveness. The regime promoted technological sophistication as evidence of Aryan superiority. Complex Tigers and Panthers supposedly demonstrated German genius, mechanical masterpieces that only superior German engineering could produce. But American pragmatism, mass-producing simple effective weapons, proved superior to German perfectionism. The ideological narrative of innate German superiority crumbled when $18 tubes carried by teenage American farm boys destroyed $250,000 German supertanks. Training programs ensured the bazooka's tactical effectiveness across American forces. Unlike German anti-tank weapons that required extensive specialized training, soldiers learned basic bazooka operation in hours rather than weeks. The weapon's elegant simplicity meant cooks, clerks, and supply personnel could become tank killers with minimal instruction. This democratization of anti-tank capability transformed battlefield dynamics in ways German doctrine could not counter. A two-man team operated most effectively. The gunner shouldered the weapon, aimed using simple iron sights, and squeezed the trigger. The loader positioned himself behind and to the side, inserting rockets from the rear breech, connecting the electrical wire from the rocket's tail fin assembly to the firing mechanism, then tapping the gunner's helmet to signal readiness. With practice, teams achieved firing rates of 4 to 5 rounds per minute, though tactical situations rarely permitted such sustained fire. Combat experience refined tactics rapidly across the Mediterranean theater. Bazooka teams learned that paired operations multiplied effectiveness. One gunner would target tracks for immobilization, while another sought weak points in armor. White phosphorus rockets, while lacking armor-piercing capability, could blind crews through vision ports and force tank abandonment as chemical smoke infiltrated crew compartments. Teams exploited terrain masterfully, using natural cover to approach within effective range unseen, then withdrawing immediately after firing to avoid retaliatory fire. The Italian campaign that began in September 1943 demonstrated the bazooka's evolution from emergency weapon to tactical cornerstone. In mountainous terrain around Monte Cassino, bazooka teams operated like snipers, sometimes waiting days for optimal shots at German armor moving through valleys below. They learned through experience that exhaust grills provided vulnerable targets. Turret rings where armor plates joined could be penetrated. Even Tigers possessed weak spots where engineering necessities created gaps in protection. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, commanding German forces in Italy, acknowledged the crisis in reports to Berlin during December 1943. American rocket launchers, he wrote, had imposed unacceptable losses on German armor, requiring fundamental reconsideration of combined arms warfare doctrine. The weapon had given American infantry formidable confidence that manifested in aggressive tactics. German tanks that once scattered infantry through intimidation now faced soldiers who advanced toward them carrying weapons capable of destruction. Training manuals documented the transformation starkly. The 1940 Wehrmacht Panzer Manual devoted one paragraph to infantry anti-tank weapons, dismissing them as negligible threats that tanks could largely ignore. The 1944 revision devoted an entire chapter to countering rocket launchers, with detailed instructions on maintaining distance, requiring infantry screens, avoiding urban terrain, and limiting night operations. Tactics that conquered France had become obsolete within 4 years. Production statistics underscored German futility in the quantitative race. While the Reich struggled to produce 100 Tigers monthly despite enormous resource allocation, American factories manufactured thousands of bazookas simultaneously. By war's end, approximately 476,000 bazookas existed in American arsenals, along with over 15 million rockets. America could afford to lose 50 bazookas per German tank destroyed and still maintain overwhelming advantage. The arithmetic of industrial warfare favored democracy over dictatorship. The weapon's influence extended beyond immediate tactical effects into strategic planning. German offensives systematically avoided urban areas where bazookas excelled, limiting operational flexibility. Supply convoys required heavier protective escorts, consuming scarce resources. Tank crews demanded more infantry support for every operation, degrading the independent mobility that made armor effective. Every adaptation consumed resources. Germany, increasingly, could not afford while fighting on multiple fronts against enemies with superior production capacity. German security forces tracked captured bazookas obsessively, understanding that even one weapon reaching resistance movements could transform insurgent capabilities. French resistance, Italian partisans, and Yugoslav guerrillas desperately sought bazookas as the ultimate force multiplier. A single bazooka team could destroy German vehicles, disrupt convoys, and impose psychological costs far exceeding the weapon's modest size. German documents from 1944 reveal near paranoia about accounting for every captured or abandoned bazooka, reflecting legitimate fears about armed resistance possessing tank-killing capability. American innovation accelerated continuously based on combat feedback. The M9 bazooka, introduced in late 1943, featured improved optical sights, aluminum construction for reduced weight, and a two-piece design that disassembled for airborne operations. The M6A3 rocket incorporated a blunt nose that prevented deflection off angled armor, a problem that had plagued earlier pointed nose variants. White phosphorus and smoke rockets expanded tactical options beyond pure armor penetration. Each improvement represented rapid iteration cycles that German weapons development, with its emphasis on perfection before production, could not match. The bazooka profoundly influenced tank design trajectories. German vehicles grew progressively heavier as designers added armor specifically against shaped charge threats. The Panther, initially conceived at 35 tons, grew to 45 tons in production variants. The Tiger II, introduced in 1944, reached 70 tons, collapsing bridges and proving nearly irrecoverable when mechanically disabled. German tanks became impractical monsters, sacrificing mobility and reliability for armor protection that proved only partially effective against weapons costing tiny fractions of their production price. Meanwhile, American doctrine evolved to maximize integrated effectiveness. Infantry and armor coordinated tactics with Sherman tanks drawing German armor into pre-positioned kill zones where concealed bazooka teams waited. Artillery suppressed German infantry screens, allowing bazooka operators to approach tanks without effective covering fire. Air power destroyed German supply columns, reducing ammunition available for suppressing American infantry. The combined arms approach treated bazookas as one element in a system designed to overwhelm German forces through superior coordination and resource application. The psychological transformation American veterans described proved as significant as material effects. Before bazookas became widely available, German tanks caused panic among infantry who possessed no defense beyond grenades thrown desperately at armored behemoths. After Sicily, when rifle squads possessed organic anti-tank capability, American infantry anticipated engaging enemy armor with confidence bordering on eagerness. They understood they could kill tanks. That confidence fundamentally altered battlefield psychology from defensive fear to offensive aggression. German prisoners of war interviewed by American intelligence officers revealed profound demoralization specifically attributed to bazookas. Tank crews spoke obsessively about rocket launchers being everywhere with no effective defense. These Wehrmacht veterans, men who had conquered Poland and France with overwhelming armored superiority, were now frightened soldiers who understood their technological advantages had evaporated. Their mighty tanks, once symbols of invincibility, had become vulnerabilities that attracted swarms of infantry armed with cheap but devastatingly effective weapons. The winter line battles throughout late 1943 and early 1944 demonstrated complete psychological reversal. German tanks, once apex predators that charged aggressively toward enemies, now moved tentatively through Italian terrain, crews constantly scanning for rocket trails. American infantry advanced with aggressive confidence, understanding they possessed tools for defeating any armored counterattack. Psychological momentum, perhaps more important than material advantage in sustained combat, had shifted decisively toward forces that armed every soldier with meaningful anti-tank capability. By early 1944, German tank tactics bore no resemblance to the terrorizing blitzkrieg that had shocked the world during 1939 and 1940. Tanks moved in tight formations with extensive infantry screens, sacrificing speed for security. Urban areas were avoided entirely whenever possible, limiting operational options. Night operations, once exploited by Germans who possessed superior training and equipment, effectively ceased as darkness concealed American infantry more effectively than German armor. The bazooka imposed constraints that systematically negated every early war German advantage. Captured German officers' testimony to Allied intelligence revealed the complete nature of their transformation. Men trained in armored warfare's supposed invincibility, told tigers were unstoppable, discovered American bazookas everywhere they operated. Tank crews transitioned psychologically from hunters to hunted, bearing crushing mental burdens. Some reported persistent nightmares featuring the distinctive whoosh of launching rockets. Others developed stress symptoms that 1940s medicine categorized as combat fatigue, but modern psychology would recognize as post-traumatic stress, specifically triggered by helplessness against ubiquitous threats. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. American production continued accelerating relentlessly throughout 1944. Improved variants appeared constantly, incorporating lessons learned from thousands of combat engagements. Training programs ensured every replacement soldier understood bazooka operations before deployment. The weapon became as fundamental to infantry tactics as rifles or machine guns. German production, constrained by resource limitations and infrastructure damage from strategic bombing, could never approach parity in anti-tank weapon availability. The bazooka inspired further American innovation in portable infantry weapons. If rockets could destroy tanks, development teams reasoned, what else became possible? Work began on recoilless rifles that used similar principles with larger warheads. Research into guided missiles explored whether rocket technology could incorporate target-seeking capabilities. The bazooka represented proof that technological innovation, combined with mass production, could trump traditional military advantages, opening conceptual pathways toward modern precision-guided munitions. German military theorists acknowledged uncomfortable realities in classified assessments circulated among senior leadership during early 1944. The Wehrmacht, which had revolutionized modern warfare through armored blitzkrieg, was being systematically defeated by industrial democracy's productive capacity. The bazooka embodied this reality perfectly. A mass-produced weapon, operated by minimally trained soldiers, was negating years of German tactical development and enormous investments in sophisticated armored fighting vehicles. Quality, German analyses concluded with bitter recognition, could not overcome quantity when the quantitative gap reached orders of magnitude difference. As spring 1944 approached and preparations intensified for France's invasion, German defenders knew thousands of bazookas would accompany Allied assault forces. Every hedgerow in Normandy's bocage terrain became a potential bazooka position. Every village represented potential ambush sites where American infantry could destroy tanks from concealment. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel personally ordered construction of specific obstacles designed to channel Allied armor away from positions favorable for bazooka teams, revealing how profoundly the weapon influenced German defensive planning. The bazooka achieved something remarkable in the months before Operation Overlord. It imposed psychological defeat before 1944's climactic battles even began. German tank crews, who had advanced confidently across Poland, France, and deep into Soviet territory, now prepared for combat with dread. They knew they would face enemy infantry, where potentially every soldier carried tank-killing weapons. The mental battle, the confidence that underwrote aggressive armoured tactics, was already lost before the first Allied soldier landed on Normandy's beaches. The transformation proved complete and irreversible. In 2 years, the bazooka evolved from experimental improvisation to tactical cornerstone that fundamentally altered armoured warfare. More importantly, it shattered German psychological superiority. Wehrmacht panzer forces, once seemingly invincible conquerors who scattered enemies through intimidation, now approached combat with visceral fear. The simple American tube had defeated the complex German tank not merely through superior numbers but through systematic psychological erosion. Analysis of combat effectiveness revealed totality. In 1940, German tanks survived on battlefields for months or years, dominating through combinations of superior armor, firepower, and crew training. By 1944, facing bazooka-equipped American infantry, German tank survival measured in days or weeks at best. The mathematics of destruction had turned decisively against Germany, not through any single catastrophic defeat, but through accumulated attrition that industrial production capacity could not replace. The bazooka represented far more than tactical innovation. It embodied industrial democracy, answering military aristocracy. Where Germany produced small numbers of superb tanks requiring expert crews and extensive training, America mass-produced weapons any citizen soldier could operate effectively after brief instruction. The philosophical difference between perfectionist German engineering culture and pragmatic American industrial culture manifested in battlefield outcomes where quantity, when properly applied through sound doctrine, defeated quality. German tank crews receiving psychological treatment for combat stress revealed the weapon's devastating mental toll. Constant anxiety, sleep disturbances characterized by nightmares featuring rocket trails, hypervigilance that prevented rest even in rear areas. They reported seeing bazooka teams everywhere, interpreting every window and doorway as potential threat positions. Many formally requested transfers to infantry units, preferring the dangers of ground combat to the psychological torture of operating armoured vehicles that attracted concentrated anti-tank fire. Medical officers treating German tankers noted symptoms resembling shell shock from the Great War, but with distinct characteristics. The affliction stemmed not from artillery's impersonal random violence, but from the specific knowledge that enemy infantry actively hunted them with weapons capable of penetrating their protection. The psychological foundation of armoured warfare, confidence in armour providing safety, had crumbled completely. Crews understood they operated targets rather than fortresses. The weapon accomplished what Soviet armies, British determination, and American air power had struggled to achieve independently. It broke German armoured forces' spirit through demonstrating that technological superiority meant nothing against mass-produced counters deployed ubiquitously. Industrial capacity, the ability to manufacture millions of adequate weapons rather than thousands of superior ones, trumped tactical genius and engineering excellence when properly exploited through sound military doctrine. As 1944 progressed toward Normandy's invasion, German tank crews prepared with dread rather than confidence. They understood they would face hundreds of thousands of American soldiers, substantial numbers armed with rocket launchers. Every crossroads, village, and hedgerow concealed potential death. Many exhibited stress symptoms before experiencing combat, revealing how profoundly the bazooka had damaged German armoured forces psychologically before battles even commenced. The final irony emerged clearly through historical analysis. Germany's response to the bazooka threat, building progressively heavier tanks with thicker armor actually worsened their strategic situation. Super heavy tanks like the 70-ton Tiger II and even heavier Jag-Tiger tank destroyers became mechanical disasters, consuming enormous resources while proving nearly immobile in practical combat conditions. Meanwhile, America produced reliable bazookas by thousands weekly, continuously improving designs while maintaining overwhelming quantitative superiority. The bazooka ultimately proved that pragmatism defeated perfectionism in industrial warfare's brutal arithmetic. Mass production overcame craftsmanship. Citizen soldiers armed with adequate weapons triumphed over professional warriors equipped with superior but scarce equipment. The weapon embodied every American advantage that decided the Second World War: industrial capacity that dwarfed Axis production, adaptability that incorporated combat lessons rapidly, and democratic military philosophy that distributed power widely rather than concentrating it among elite units. By June 1944, as Allied forces prepared final details for D-Day, the transformation reached absolute completion. German tank crews no longer discussed glory or victory. They discussed survival. They understood that across the English Channel, hundreds of thousands of Americans waited to invade, many armed with the simple tube that had haunted their nightmares since Sicily. The Wehrmacht's armoured forces, which had conquered Europe through revolutionary mechanized warfare, now feared American infantry more than opposing tanks. The bazooka inverted fundamental combat logic in ways that military theorists would study for decades. The weak had become strong. The simple had defeated the complex. Infantry, traditionally vulnerable to armoured assault, now hunted tanks with confidence. This represented true strategic victory, destroying not merely equipment but the psychological foundations that made German armoured doctrine effective. The weapon proved conclusively that industrial democracy would triumph over military aristocracy when conflicts extended beyond initial campaigns into wars of attrition. Every private soldier carrying a bazooka possessed more real combat power against armoured threats than a Tiger commander, whose expensive, sophisticated vehicle attracted concentrated fire from multiple directions. That fundamental truth marked not merely tactical shift but philosophical transformation in how wars would be fought. German tankers who had terrorized Europe across 3 years of victorious campaigns learned that terror flows bidirectionally. The rocket launcher's distinctive whoosh, followed by the sharp crack of warhead detonation against armor, became the soundtrack of their nightmares. The weapon they had initially dismissed as primitive American improvisation became their nemesis, omnipresent and deadly. In that psychological transformation lay the essence of how American industrial might systematically defeated German military tradition. Heinz Guderian, widely recognized as German armored warfare's intellectual father, admitted in classified reports during late 1944 that American mass production had created battlefield conditions where individual enemy infantry units possessed more organic anti-tank capability than entire German combined arms formations had deployed during 1940's French campaign. This quantitative superiority fundamentally altered mechanized warfare's character. Numbers, when applied systematically through sound doctrine, overwhelmed qualitative advantages that German engineering had worked desperately to maintain. The bazooka achieved something unprecedented in modern military history. It democratized battlefield power in ways that transcended mere tactical innovation. Unlike complex weapons systems requiring specialized crews and extensive training, any soldier could learn basic bazooka operation within hours. This meant every infantryman represented a potential tank killer. German tank crews never knew which American soldiers might produce rocket launchers from concealment. The universal threat imposed constant psychological pressure that eroded combat effectiveness more thoroughly than actual casualties. The weapon's versatility expanded its tactical impact far beyond initial anti-tank role. Soldiers discovered bazookas could clear fortified buildings by firing rockets through windows or walls. Machine gun nests that pinned down infantry advances could be eliminated with single well-placed rockets. Bunkers and pillboxes that resisted conventional weapons collapsed under shaped charge explosions. Even low-flying aircraft became vulnerable when desperate soldiers aimed rockets skyward. Units competed to acquire additional bazookas beyond authorized allocations, recognizing the weapon's universal problem-solving capability. The contrast with German equivalent weapons proved instructive. The Panzerfaust, introduced in 1943, was single-shot and disposable with severely limited range. The Panzerschreck, essentially a scaled-up bazooka copy, proved heavy and cumbersome with massive backblast that revealed firing and positions to enemy observers. The American bazooka balanced portability, firepower, and sustainability more effectively than any comparable weapon fielded by any combatant. This represented not German engineering failure, but American industrial philosophy's superiority in producing adequate weapons in overwhelming quantities. By late 1944, the bazooka had evolved far beyond its original anti-tank mission into a universal infantry support weapon. Machine gun nests received bazooka fire. Sniper positions attracted rockets. Roadblocks were demolished with shaped charges. The weapon's reliability and demonstrated effectiveness made it first choice for nearly any tactical problem requiring immediate application of explosive force. Its versatility multiplied its strategic value beyond what raw anti-tank statistics suggested. The impact extended well beyond tank crews to affect all German ground forces. Infantry commanders understood that American rocket launchers threatened their supporting armor, potentially leaving ground troops without armored protection during critical engagements. Artillery crews knew that bazookas could destroy their guns if American infantry penetrated defensive lines. Headquarters units worried constantly about raids by bazooka-armed American forces. A sense of universal vulnerability permeated German forces facing Americans equipped with ubiquitous rocket launchers. Training materials from 1944 revealed transformed American tactical confidence. Soldiers learned aggressive tank hunting techniques using terrain and teamwork systematically. Emphasis centered on offensive action, taking initiative against armor rather than defensive reactions. This represented complete reversal from early war doctrine, when infantry primarily sought to avoid or survive tank encounters rather than actively hunting armored vehicles. The bazooka transformed American infantry from potential victims into confident predators. German countermeasures, despite extensive tactical evolution, proved ultimately futile. Maintaining distance from American infantry was impractical in Europe's confined terrain, where villages, forests, and bocage hedgerows limited sightlines to hundreds rather than thousands of meters. Infantry escorts slowed armored operations to walking pace, negating mobility advantages. Prohibitions on entering towns and cities paralyzed tactical flexibility. Every countermeasure degraded German combat effectiveness, while providing only partial protection against ubiquitous rocket launchers. The bazooka's success influenced post-war military development globally and profoundly. Every military organization recognized that infantry required organic anti-tank capability integral to basic force structure. The principle that portable weapons could defeat heavy armor became fundamental to modern military doctrine. Contemporary guided anti-tank missiles, from the Soviet RPG series to American Javelin systems, descend directly from concepts pioneered by the bazooka. The technological lineage remains clear 7 decades later. Production records revealed industrial impact that extended beyond immediate military applications. Factories without prior military manufacturing experience successfully produced bazooka components, demonstrating American industrial depth and flexibility. Simplicity in design allowed distributed production across hundreds of facilities. This proved American industry's capacity to mobilize comprehensively for total war, absorbing new products and scaling production rapidly. Lessons learned would shape post-war manufacturing practices across multiple industries. The human dimension appeared consistently in veteran accounts from both sides. Young Americans who never imagined fighting tanks became confident hunters with minimal training. Farm boys, factory workers, and students all became tank killers after brief instruction on shouldering a tube and aiming at weak points. Military heroism, traditionally associated with elite units and specialized training, was democratized to encompass every infantryman carrying a standardized weapon. This philosophical shift reflected broader American democratic values applied to warfare. German memoirs written decades after the war consistently identified the bazooka as the most psychologically transformative weapon they encountered. Not Allied tanks, which German armour could engage on roughly equal terms. Not artillery, which all armies employed extensively. Not air power, despite its devastating material effects. The bazooka, carried by infantry and fired from unexpected positions, represented the weapon that most fundamentally changed their combat experience, from confidence to constant fear. Commanders who had felt invincible commanding Tigers in Poland during 1939 described constant anxiety in Italy during 1943 and 44. The knowledge that any American soldier might carry tank-killing weapons created perpetual stress that damaged combat effectiveness, regardless of actual engagement rates. Psychological impact exceeded physical casualties in eroding German armoured forces' will to fight aggressively. Fear proved more corrosive than losses. Pacific theatre effectiveness, though less celebrated in popular accounts, proved even more decisive given Japanese armour's relative weakness. Japanese tanks employed thinner armour than German vehicles, making them highly vulnerable to bazooka fire. Marines destroyed tanks, fortified bunkers, and cave positions with devastating efficiency using rockets. In island-hopping campaigns where American forces systematically reduced Japanese strongpoints, bazookas proved indispensable for reducing fortifications that conventional weapons struggled to eliminate. By war's end, the bazooka demonstrated conclusively that technological superiority alone could not guarantee military success. Mass production, effective distribution, and thorough training could overcome qualitative advantages when quantitative gaps reached sufficient magnitude. This lesson influenced American military planning throughout the Cold War, emphasizing industrial mobilization capacity as strategic asset equal to technological innovation. The ability to produce millions of adequate weapons proved more valuable than producing thousands of superior ones. American and German philosophical approaches to weapons development revealed fundamental differences in strategic thinking. Germany sought perfect technical solutions, superior but complex weapons produced in limited numbers after extensive development. America sought practical solutions, adequate weapons in overwhelming quantities deployed rapidly. Battlefield results favored American approaches decisively, validating industrial democracy's capacity to outproduce authoritarian regimes in sustained conflicts. German panzer veterans interviewed decades after the war consistently identified bazookas as the weapon most fundamentally changing their combat experience. Not Allied tanks, which represented familiar threats that German doctrine addressed. Not air power, despite its material devastation. The bazooka, carried by common infantry and fired from concealment, transformed their psychological experience from confident aggression to defensive anxiety. This assessment from experienced German crews validates the weapon's truly transformative impact on armoured warfare's character. The legacy extended far beyond immediate military applications into broader technological development. The bazooka proved that American industry could rapidly develop, mass produce, and deploy innovation when motivated by military necessity. This capability established foundations for military-industrial dominance that persisted through the Cold War and into the 21st century. The organizational structures, production techniques, and quality control methods developed for bazooka manufacturing influenced countless subsequent programs. Looking back across 8 decades, the bazooka encapsulates American strengths during the Second World War. Practical innovation addressing immediate problems, mass production scaling solutions to unprecedented levels, democratic distribution ensuring every soldier possessed effective tools, thorough training maximizing weapons effectiveness across entire forces. These elements combined created overwhelming battlefield advantages that industrial capacity sustained throughout extended conflict. Industrial democracy defeated military tradition through systematic application of superior resources. German tankers facing bazookas throughout the war's final 2 years learned harsh truths about modern industrial warfare's nature. Their magnificent Tigers and Panthers, genuine engineering masterpieces representing decades of armored vehicle development, proved vulnerable to $18 tubes carried by teenage American soldiers. Tactical superiority developed through years of combat experience was systematically negated by simple rockets that any infantryman could fire effectively. Psychological advantages from early victories crumbled before weapons, making every American soldier dangerous to armored vehicles. The bazooka fundamentally transformed warfare's dynamics in ways that persist into contemporary conflicts. Tanks, which restored mobility to the First World War's deadlocked battlefields, now faced infantry weapons capable of destroying them at close range. An arms race between armor protection and anti-armor penetration began during the Second World War and continues today. Modern reactive armor, active protection systems, and composite armor represent direct responses to threats pioneered by the bazooka's shaped charge warhead. In final analysis, the bazooka succeeded through practical effectiveness multiplied by mass production. The weapon embodied quintessentially American characteristics: simple design, reliable operation, devastating effectiveness when properly employed. In industrial warfare's brutal arithmetic, the nation arming every soldier with effective weapons would inevitably prevail over nations arming select few with perfect weapons. Quantity, when applied systematically through sound doctrine, overcame quality when quantitative gaps reached the magnitude American industry achieved. German tank crews who entered the Second World War as masters of revolutionary armored warfare discovered they had become targets for mass-produced American weapons operated by minimally trained infantry. The bazooka demolished not merely tanks but entire conceptual frameworks of armored superiority that German doctrine presumed. In that comprehensive demolition lay fundamental keys to Allied victory in Europe. The humble metal tube that Lieutenant Uhl improvised from scrap changed military history. It gave American infantry power to destroy enemy armor independently, transformed tactical approaches to combined arms warfare, and shattered German psychological assumptions about armored invincibility. The bazooka proved that practical innovation, combined with industrial capacity, could defeat tradition and technical perfection when democratic societies mobilized comprehensively for total war. As the Second World War concluded in Europe during spring 1945, lessons learned proved unmistakable. Future conflicts would require weapons capable of mass production, easy operation, and wide distribution. Complex systems retained importance for specialized roles, but wars would be won by nations arming common soldiers with simple, effective weapons in overwhelming numbers. The bazooka established this principle through demonstrated battlefield effectiveness across 3 years of combat. German tankers who survived the war carried permanent memories of the weapon that transformed them psychologically from predators to prey. The bazooka rocket's distinctive sound remained etched in consciousness as the auditory signature marking the end of German armored supremacy. That simple American tube, improvised from scrap metal and coat hanger sights, defeated the complex German tank through systematic application of industrial democracy's overwhelming productive capacity. In that defeat lay comprehensive demonstration of how industrial democracy triumphed over military aristocracy in history's greatest conflict. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.